This is my desk. This is where I create the artwork. If you pop down into the description, there's a link to the print shop where you can get all kinds of things. This is one I'm working on at the moment. It's a 4-door Plymouth Fury 3. I tend to do the less usual stuff because that's what I enjoy. As you can see, I've got my reference up at the top. I've got my drawing tablet down at the bottom here. But this isn't what I'm here to show you. This is more to illustrate a point. When you're working on a tablet like this, you need something to protect the screen from your hand. And most artists use a glove of some sort, and this is the one that I'm using. You can buy ready-made Lycra ones, and they're okay. The trouble I've found is, unless you're washing them every single day, especially when you're doing this full time, they get really kind of nasty. And I wasn't very comfortable with them. They never seemed quite wide enough for my hand, which is a bit weird. I mean, half the glove isn't even there, so you'd think that wouldn't be a problem, but it is. And the length of the fingers isn't quite right, and they're just nasty. I don't like them. So I wondered if it was fairly easy to make your own. And it is. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. So I'm going to show you how to make some of these today, so that you can make as many as you like, in whatever you want, so that you can personalise your drawing experience and also make some gloves that go through the wash a bit better. To begin with, you'll need some materials. A sheet of A4 paper is usually big enough. If you have very large hands, you might need to go a size up. A pen and some good sharp scissors. And you just want to put your hand naturally on the paper. Don't be tempted to spread your hand out. Just relaxed, however your hand looks. And start from here. And just draw around whatever shape your hand happens to be. What is it they call it in America? Turkey art, I think. Now then, we are missing these two fingers. There's no point drawing around those because, well, we're not making those. So the glove stops here, but then cuts across your hand there. So I draw in just this section here to give me a guide, and then around the back to the wrist. And this will give me a rough idea of what shape I need. And this is your basic template. There are a few changes that you'll have to make to the actual shapes here. I'll show you that in just a moment. But the first thing we need to do is join from here to over here. Now we know that that line there is the outside edge of our hand. That's this piece here. So we know we want to be inside of that. The other thing we need to change is the wrist. If you keep it this thin and you haven't used a stretchy fabric, you won't get this on your hand. So I widen this out a little bit. You can make this as long as you like. If you wanted to make some ridiculous cuffs, you could certainly do that. And that is our basic template. Now then, from here we will end up here, which is quite a different shape. And this is after a process of refinement. Now you will find that there's different results for different people's hands. I have quite square palms and quite long fingers proportionally to my palm. Some people have very narrow hands, some people have very short hands. It all depends on what your hand shape ends up being. So I would strongly recommend getting some cheaper fabric. Something like this is ideal. This is a shirt, just an ordinary shirt that had worn out, and I've saved the fabric. We'll be using this later. But this is brilliant for mock-up purposes, because what you do is you cut out your shape here, and you want to make sure that when you cut this out that you give yourself a border, what we call the seam allowance, which would be here, all the way around the glove. Because when you sew it together, the sewing machine needs to put the line of stitching away from the edge of the fabric. So you need this as sort of your buffer zone. And once you've added that, that's how your pattern changes to this sort of more soft looking thing. And you can see where the edge of the paper is the edge of my fabric, and then where the pen line is will be where my stitching line goes. And you want that all the way around. But when you've cut out your basic shape, cut it out of 2 pieces of fabric, and you sew from here at the bottom of this finger all the way around down to this point, and then you sew from here to here. You need to leave this section that your hand goes in open, and you need to leave this section where you didn't make fingers open. Don't turn it inside out, leave it with all your raw edges showing, and try that on. The reason I'm not showing you this is it takes quite a while to do. It's a lot of cut the fabric out, sew it, put it on your hand, and then figure out where it's tight and loose, let the stitches out or bring more stitches in, and try it on and off a few times, and then trim it to the shape that you need. Once you've done all that, you then have a pattern, because the shape that you end up with you can trace around again onto a fresh piece of paper, and that will give you the glove pattern. Once you've got to this stage, you want 2 of these for each glove. Because we're not making something fancy with this, you don't need to use pins. You can cheat a little bit. This is just a piece of work clothing effectively, so unless you're very fussy, I would recommend using a pen. And all you want to do is trace around the outside of your pattern. Make sure that your pen is a good contrast to the fabric that you're drawing on. And if you draw on from the back, it's less likely to show through. You don't have to be super duper accurate with this. Just accurate enough. Now once you've got the one piece drawn around, to save yourself some time, fold your fabric in half, if you can. I'm using offcuts here. I'm going to have to make most of these in 2 pieces, but I'll show you how to do them in 1 piece in just a moment. Once you've folded it in half, pin through both layers to keep everything from wandering out of position, and simply cut it out. There you go, that is 1 glove. But what if your offcut is big enough that you don't need to use 2 separate pieces like this? This is just the back of a dress shirt. The sleeves had worn out on it, I couldn't repair it, but there was enough fabric to salvage for other projects like this one. First thing you want to do is take your template that you made, and this side, the short side, which is your thumb side, you want to fold this seam allowance away. Now fold your material in half and put this edge here that you've folded against the fold on the material. And that's the doorbell. I'll be right back. I guess the Royal Mail are off strike now. I hope they got what they wanted from the strike action. Strikes are good. Right. For this one, I am going to pin this because it's just going to be a little bit easier for me to show you. And then, as with your ordinary pattern, we cut this out, but don't cut along this edge where the fold is. We leave that intact. Best way to think of that is as though that's a seam that you've already sewn up, which is why we got rid of the seam allowance, and you're basically folding it where your stitch line would have been. And that gives you this peculiar shape. There's the fold line that we made, and these are the fingers either side. And this means that when you sew this together, you just do it like we'll do the others, you just have one less seam to do. I'm going to carry on and cut out the rest of the fabric that I want. I'm making a few of these, and then I shall bring you back when we're ready to sew some things together. One selection of gloves, and they're all very different, and that's good. This is using up leftover material as well. These leopard print ones here used to be a bed sheet. They'd already been turned into a shirt, and I had enough left over to do 2 gloves here. These stripy ones were a shirt that I wore until I wore it out. The pink is from a project that you may have seen in one of the videos previously on the channel, where I put some new collars and cuffs on a black shirt. I'll pop a link to that in the description and a little box if I remember. The rainbow fabric, that's from another project on here, the rainbow square shirt. And this one might not work. This is, well, I think of it as unicorn fabric because it's got holographic sequins printed onto a silver ground, and it's not showing off brilliantly because it's overcast today, so you can't really see it fantastically well. The problem with this fabric is it stretches that way, and it stretches that way, and it's a lot. My sewing machine does not like sewing this fabric on its own, and I had enough to do half a glove. So I'm layering that with some of the rainbow fabric, and we'll experiment and we'll see if that works. What I'm hoping is this rainbow fabric gives this the stability that the sewing machine needs, and then I can sew it all together. But that one might not work. I'll also mention the fabric that you use, avoid anything like nets or sequins or even embroidered materials. You don't want anything that might scratch the tablet surface or cause too much friction. You also want something ideally that's majority natural fibres, because you want the fabric to breathe. There's nothing worse than sweaty hands when you're working. So this kind of unicorn fabric I wouldn't recommend for making these gloves out of, partly because it's horrible stuff to work with, but also it's not really going to breathe as much as you might like, whereas lightweight cottons and these slightly heavier weight cottons are going to be brilliant. They're going to breathe really, really well. They should wear quite nicely, so you shouldn't find them wearing out too quickly. Yeah, I guess it's sewing time. Let's get these put together. I've started with the experimental one first. The first job is I've sewn the unicorn fabric onto the rainbow fabric, and you can sort of see in this light more what it does. It seems a more yellowy incandescent light is better for showing it off. Because this is a 4-way stretch, it has obviously moved as I've sewn it, and as much as that's a bit of a nuisance, it's also going to work in our favour for the next stage, because it will just stretch where we need it to stretch. I don't like working with 4-way stretchers. For sewing the other side of this, you have to put your 2 outers face to face, and then pin the edges that you're going to sew first. We aren't going to sew all the way around. You only need to sew this section on this side, leave this piece open at the bottom, and then you start about in line with the bottom of the finger here from this side. So that section there is open, there's no stitching there. And we go around both fingers all the way back down to here. Now depending on your fabric, if it's got enough stretch, you'll be able to leave the bottom closed like this. If not, you may need to unpick some of the stitches on this side to give yourself a split, just to get your hand in and out of the glove. It really does depend on the fabric and the shape of your hands as to which approach to take. So we'll see what works. These are a little bit trial and error because there's so many variables with your hands and whatnot. Once you have a pattern that works for your hand, they're very quick because you can just run them up to suit your hands. But this is why they're done in lycra and one size. There's none of this worrying about how it fits business. Take your time as you go around the fingertips. It is quite a tight curve, so you don't want to rush it. You might find you need to lift the foot and rotate the work as you go a little bit. Again, depends how big or small your fingers are, your machine, all kinds of things. Now when you get to the bottom of the finger where they both join your hand, you have a couple of options with the stitches. You can either go in a loop like you did with the fingertip, you can come down to a point and then go back, you can stop the thread line here and start a new line of stitching, or you can go across a couple of stitches and then back up, which is what I'm going to do. It's a bit like doing a curve, but a lot easier. Before you turn this the right way out, I would recommend trying it on your hand. And then you'll know how close you are to a proper fit. Oh, that unicorn fabric's quite grabby this way around. Right, so what I do know is I've sewn just a little bit too far here, so I just need to unpick that because I can't get it all the way down on my hand. I can get my finger all the way through into the tip, but because of this fabric here, it's just stopping the glove moving up. So just popped a couple of stitches. We'll try it again. Much better. The little finger, I've got the unicorn fabric is just bunching up around my finger and I can't do anything about it at the moment. But that isn't now pulling on that part of my hand, which is good. I don't need to open out the cuff anymore. That actually fits quite well, allows me to get my hand in, and this feels very snug, which is great. The next job is to trim back the excess material up here. You're going to have to go quite close to your stitching because when you turn the gloves the right way out, you don't want all of this bulk in there. So just make sure you're happy with the stitches that you've put in and they're nice and secure. If there's any spots you're not happy with, go over them again and then trim back. I'll trim this back off camera and I will bring you back to see what it looks like. It's a little bit fiddly to do and I want to be able to see what I'm doing better than through the camera lens. Here we go. got that all trimmed down, and you can see just how close you end up going to the stitching. The other thing is when you get to the join at the bottom of the fingers here, if you cut a little sort of V, that helps with mobility on that part of it. At the side, where the finger stops, you don't want to cut off the excess on the bit where the rest of your hand goes through there. I'll show you why in a moment. I'm now going to turn this the right way out. You can use a pencil or any sort of blunt tool to turn out the end of the fingertips, and we'll do the rest of the stitching on this to show you how that bit goes. I'm going to show you something on one of the other gloves I'm doing. This material has no stretch in it at all, so I can't actually get my hand through the wrist opening without putting a split into it. And all you do for that is just split the seam down the side that you've sewn and fold back the fabric a small amount, and then we'll just sew that up. Because of how small the gloves are and how they're worn, you don't really need to worry about frayed edges or the fabric unravelling. Usually, if you just sew it down like this, it's perfectly fine. The glove that you saw me wearing at the start of the video, I've had that one for a couple of years now. It's been through the washing machine, it's even been tumble dried, and I haven't had any fraying problems or issues with it falling apart. That's literally all you need to do, is just a very small seam there, and that just gives you enough of an opening on the wrist to get your hand through. Because it's this part of your hand here that's quite wide, and my hands don't squash down very far, which is a nuisance when you're trying to do any sort of fiddly work, as you'll have seen in any of the car videos when I'm trying to get behind a dashboard or similar. Once you have the split done there, the next thing to do is turn the hem of the glove. Same principle, just fold a small amount of the fabric up and sew over the top. We'll do that for the hem where your hand goes in, and then the piece at the top where your fingers come out, which I suppose is another hem really, it's just not at the bottom, and you literally just sew around. It's very simple. I'm not bothering to pin any of this, it's so small and these seams are so well behaved that I don't really need to. If you feel more confident using pins or tacking, then definitely do that. Oh, another note as well, if you feel like you should match the thread, do that too. I'm not really bothering because these are a work item and having matched thread on them doesn't really matter that much to me. And that's how your hem ends up. Of course, you'll snip off all these loose threads that are everywhere. I'll do the bigger opening. If you start on the larger opening at the finger end where the seam is, it's a little bit easier to get going. It's a little bit awkward when you get to the fold or the seam at the opposite side to the finger, because the shape changes a little bit. If you just take your time, you'll get there. And that's that seam done as well. Apart from a press and snipping off the loose threads, this one is finished. I'm going to buzz through and do the rest of them, and then we'll try them out and see which ones have actually worked, and see if the experimental unicorn one actually ends up holding up, or if it ends up being a nuisance. All of the gloves that I wanted to make are finished. This one, which you saw at the start of the video, this is the very first one that I made. It took me several prototypes to get to a version that actually worked. So when you make these, don't be surprised if you need to do a few mock-ups, play about with fit a little bit. Everybody's hands are slightly different, and these aren't as stretchy as those well, sometimes surprisingly expensive ones that you buy online. Bit of trial and error, but it is worth it. Once you've got the hang of it, you can make them in any colour and pattern that you want and really go to town if you want to. So we'll ignore this one for now. This one's done a couple of years service. I'll probably continue to use it. These are all the different ones we've got. I do have a couple of duplicates, so we'll discard these two. And let's try out each one and see how the different fabrics behave and feel. So the first one is the leopard print one. This used to be a bedsheet. This is probably a polycotton, so a cotton polyester blend. It's very lightweight, which is nice, so it's unlikely to make my hand particularly sweaty, and it moves quite well on the tablet. Where have I put my mouse? Ah, there you are. So I want something that's not going to cause me problems with grabbing. Now this does feel a little bit odd compared to the original one. It's, with it being such light fabric, it doesn't give me as much of a barrier between my hand and the tablet itself. Functionally, that's not an issue, it's more what I'm used to. But that feels okay. A little bit awkward to get off because there's no stretch in this at all. This has no ability to stretch, so this is the one where it has the split in the side there. This one used to be a shirt. Again, it's probably a polycotton blend or 100% cotton, I'm not sure. It feels a little bit softer, so it might be 100% cotton. Very similar sort of lightweight feel to it. So functionally, this should feel extremely similar. There shouldn't be much difference between this and the leopard print one. Actually, that feels slightly nicer. When I move my hand, this feels like it moves a bit smoother across the surface than the leopard print one. There's not much in it, but just enough. Next, this one is 100% cotton, and again, no stretch, so it has the little split on the side. This is brand new fabric that I bought for that black shirt that I did the new collar and cuffs on. If you check through the sewing playlist, you'll find that living in there. Not quite as comfortable, this one. I got the shape of the fingers just a little bit off on the tips. But it's still okay, it's still comfortable enough. Oh, actually, yeah, that actually immediately feels like it has less resistance on the surface. So it does feel like the higher the natural fibre content, the more comfortable it actually is to use. Yeah, that's much nicer. But because of the fingers not being quite as good a fit, it's a little bit more uncomfortable in that respect. However, when it's been through the wash a couple of times and been worn for a while, that may well change. Yep, that one works okay. This one, this is what I made the rainbow square shirt out of. Again, it's another video in the playlist. This is cotton, but it has a stretch. It's not a huge amount of stretch, but it's enough that I needed no split on the inside to actually wear this one. So this should actually be quite comfortable. It's a slightly heavier cotton as well than the other ones that we've tried out so far, and it's not a very smooth finish. Because it's printed, this is quite matte, so this might be a bit grippy on the surface. Ooh, if anything, that's a little bit slippier than I'd like. But that could be because I've just been using some that had a little bit more resistance. So that was the opposite to what I was expecting. No, that's okay. That's quite comfortable. I don't have any problems with that. Particularly this part of it seems a bit more comfortable for some reason. I'm not sure why. It could just be that little bit extra stretch means that this section of my hand here is able to move a little bit more freely. So it feels less restrictive further down. It's only marginal though. Pièce de résistance. The unicorn glove. Which makes me feel slightly like Michael Jackson. Can I say that these days? Probably. Okay, well, immediately on this one, the first thing is the shape of the fingers on this is probably the most comfortable of the lot. But that's probably partially down to the fact that this sparkly fabric on the back is a four-way stretch, and then this fabric on this side is a one-way stretch, so there's a lot of give in everything there. It is heavier. I can see this getting a bit warm when I'm using it, so this might be a winter glove, because of course this winter nobody's going to be able to afford any energy whatsoever, so we'll just have to wrap up. Now then, I've got that big long line there to do. This piece I'm working on is one that's been in my to-do pile for quite a while. I've not been able to really get the look I want on it. But when it's eventually done, it will appear in the shop. So if you've not been to the shop yet, have a look in the description below. There will be a link to it. I sell prints. I do original artwork as well, but not as often. And at the moment I've been quite busy, so I've not really had the time to go through the commission process with people. You know, one thing I am struggling with getting the hang of here is each glove behaves slightly differently, and it means what I'm used to my hand moving, the way I'm used to my hand moving on the tablet is different with each glove. So I would probably recommend, if you're going to make these and you have a preference, make them all out of the same type of fabric, because their properties for how they actually move over the surface is quite different from glove to glove, and it can change the way that you control your lines as you draw them. When you are drawing a really long line, just as an aside, don't look here. Look down here. The further away from the point that you're actually drawing, the straighter the line you tend to be able to draw. I haven't drawn a very straight line there, but then normally I wouldn't do this on camera. Anyway, this one does work. It's probably the least comfortable of the bunch in terms of the weight. The leopard print one that I tried out first, that one's really nice. It's very lightweight. It's almost like I've got nothing on my hand, which is what you want. And all of them are perfectly fine for using on this. Thank you for joining me on this one. It's a fairly straightforward project. Once you've got the hang of the pattern, it's not that difficult to make as many of these as you want. So they don't take much material. And the best thing as well, if you want to know how much material you need, put both of your hands on the fabric, and if both of your hands fit, you know you've got enough. So there's not even any complicated measuring or working out to do. Thank you for sticking with me through the video. Please do check the description below for prints. You've had a quick glimpse of what I do for artwork. I might do some videos in the future on how I make artwork, we shall see. and I shall see you next time. Bye for now.